Well, hello, my friends. I have added a section to chapter 1. I think it's really important for all of us to be on the same page with regard to how finance fits in with our economic system and with our political system. These three areas are inextricably linked together. Can't have one without the other. So I think it's important for us to have a clear understanding of how they all fit in together and what kind of system that we operate in America. And so let's go through some of the important concepts with regard to capitalism versus socialism and communism and how finance fits in with capitalism. All right. So in capitalism, individuals control the majority of the wealth and income and the means of production. The majority, the vast majority of the wealth, the income, and the means of production. In socialism, wealth, income, and investments are shared between an elected state organization and individuals. So in socialism, individuals own some of the wealth and means of production, and the government or the state owns the other share. And the state has a very large share of ownership of the means of production and income and wealth. Okay? In communism, one small group controls the wealth, the income, and the provision of goods and services. Okay? So in socialism, it's spread between the government sector, what we call the public sector, and the private sector. In communism, the state owns the vast majority of the wealth and income and means of production, and the state really consists of a small group of people. Okay? So communism is always found only in a dictatorship form of government. Dictatorship political system, a small group of people that control a large group of people. So please note that political systems are ways countries determine who will make the laws for the population. Okay? So first we have the political system. What type of governmental system are we going to have? And then the politicians structure the economic system. That's the order in which it operates. Okay? All right, so in a capitalist system, as I said, individuals who own wealth and income, and financial institutions that hold wealth for individuals, and these financial institutions include banks, pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies. They allocate capital, which is money, based on the returns anticipated from the investments. So how money is going to be spread into different areas of our economy is based on the returns that the different investments are expected to generate. Okay? So, because of this, in a capitalist system, loyalty is owed first to the owners of the capital. And those owners are individuals, not the government. Okay? But there are other stakeholders, people who have an interest in the economic system that you must consider other than just the owners. Okay? And those other stakeholders include employees, customers, suppliers, and other members of the community. All of these groups have an interest in the success of the investments that are made. Okay? So what is a return? This thing that drives or determines how much money will be invested into each area. Okay? Returns. Well, the return is the cash flow, and you've learned that from accounting, or the profit, which is income from the project and or the gain on sale of assets. This is the cash flow or profit. And you put that in the numerator and you divide that into the dollar amount of the investment. So an investment is made, a certain amount of money is put into an investment, and then income or cash flow is generated by that investment. And the question is, how does the income generated or the cash flow generated by the investment compare with the amount of money that is put into the investment? And that ratio is called a return. Okay? And the return, in turn, determines how much money will be put into that investment. So it's really not so much based on the allocation decision isn't so much based on personality and relationship, it's based on returns. Okay? All right, so for a business to survive, its return must exceed the cost of capital. The return you generate must be higher than the cost of the money that you put into an investment. This is a fundamental concept of capitalism, okay? That in order to create value, a business must generate a return in excess of its capital. The cost of accessing and using the money that a business uses. Okay. Other items that impact the return an investor should expect to receive include, so this is in addition to the cost of your capital, you need to be compensated. If you're an investor, you need to be compensated for risk, excess risk. So we're going to have to assess the risk that we think is associated with an investment. Okay? We're going to have to assess the time that we think our investment dollars will be tied up in the investment. Okay? And we are going to have to be compensated for inflation. Okay? So inflation is the rising cost of living because money will be invested for a period of time, and then hopefully profit will be generated over time. That profit needs to cover inflation. If we have a 3% return on an investment and we have 4% inflation, then we are losing money. So investors have to be compensated for risk, for time, and for inflation. And the return on an investment should look very similar to the returns that are generated by other similar investments. Okay? So other investments, if they're going to be successful, they have to cover their cost of capital, they have to cover risk, they have to cover time, and they have to cover inflation. Okay? Although the amount of money required for an investment is a practical consideration, do we need $1,000 for this investment, or do we need $1 million for this investment? Okay? Theoretically, the dollar amount of the investment isn't that important. What's really important is the return. So what we do is we create a ratio. Cash flow or income in the numerator, the dollar amount of the investment in the denominator. And if it's a 10% return or a 15% return, that's what's important relative to the risk and the time and inflation. That's what's important. The 15% or 20%, the cost of capital, okay? Not just the dollar amount. This investment's going to cost me $1 million. This investment is only going to cost me $1,000. It is the return, theoretically, it is the return that determines the amount of money that will be put into an investment. All right. Capitalism is not perfect, okay? But capitalism has proven over time to create more value for people, to bring more people out of poverty than any other system that has been invented so far. So one challenge capitalism has is to keep investors focused on long-term versus short-term profits. if capitalism is practiced properly, then we are focused on the long term, not on the short term. There's always tension between gamblers, speculators who want to make a quick buck, and true investors who are in it to maximize return over the long term. There is a big difference between speculating and investing. Okay? Another challenge is to require companies to pay a fair share of their cost of externalities, like pollution. Businesses are trying to maximize their return. Part of that effort involves trying to minimize cost and sometimes trying to control the amount of pollution that a business creates. Controlling that pollution requires big expenditures on plant and equipment. And so some businesses don't want to pay the cost of generating that pollution. And so that's where government has to step in. We as a society come to an agreement that we want clean air and we want clean water. Okay? And business pays for that, and of course, what that really means is consumers, customers end up paying for that. That's called an externality, pollution. Everyone is affected by pollution. Okay? But we've got to make businesses pay their fair share. Another challenge of capitalism is to limit the influence investors have on government policymakers. And this is really more of a political system question. Okay? How much access to our politicians are we going to give our investors? Investors who create jobs, investors who contribute to campaigns. How much influence will they have on the policymakers? And honestly, we want to minimize the influence that they have. We want our policymakers to understand the realities that they're dealing with, but we don't want to allow our investors to influence policymakers to make short-term or to make decisions that might positively impact business profits over the short term, but create externalities like pollution, and also don't set priorities for the long term. So if you're not careful, you let the business people, the speculators, pressure the policymakers, and the business people end up making short-term profits that are not good for our economy and for our environment over the long term. So we need to hold our investors in check. Okay? The major problem that communism and socialism have is the control a small group has on the wealth that a country has. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you put people into power, human nature is such that people want more and more power, and they want that power for a longer period of time. And you end up with a small group of people who live a great life, and a large group of people who do not. Okay? That's just human nature, and we have countless examples of this unfolding over history, where you had good intention on the front end to take care of a large group of people, but what you ended up having was a very small group of people who live like kings and everybody else who struggles. Okay? These systems tend to be very corrupt because they're not based on returns, they're based on relationships. Okay? And they become very inefficient in terms of how resources are used. Resources are not allocated well, and a lot of pollution happens. Who are the biggest polluters on the planet? And if you said America, you would be wrong. You're looking at Russia, You're looking at China, you're looking at India, you're looking at Brazil, you're looking at Germany, and Russia and China are still, well, China's still a communist country. I'm not sure how you would describe Russia. It's a dictatorship. And these political systems do not care about the environment. Okay? All right. So under these systems, because they're so corrupt, and because no one is really rewarded for their intelligence or for their hard work, it is really difficult to keep the citizens ambitious, hardworking, and energized. All right, so that's the end of the supplement. You have supplement notes. These questions, these topics, will be questions that show up on your exam. So please fill in these blanks and get them submitted and study them. Until next time, peace. Shalom.